Welcome to If I Could Say One More Thing, a podcast where stories explore the words left unspoken, the moments that linger, and the what-ifs that never quite fade. Through fiction, shaped from real lives, we step into the spaces between what happened and what might have been. The names change, the ache underneath them doesn't. Every family has a box somewhere, not always cardboard. Sometimes it's a name nobody says out loud. In this story, Nina is helping her 72-year-old mother, Ruth, pack up the house she raised her in, and finds a shoebox at the back of a closet. Inside, a passport, a letter never sent, and a photograph of a woman Nina doesn't recognize, laughing in 1975 beside a man who was never her father. This story was inspired by a real conversation between a mother and a daughter, though Nina, Ruth, and all identifying details are fictionalized to protect their privacy. What's true is the box and what was inside it. This is the life she folded away. My mother had decided to downsize with the grim efficiency of a woman preparing not for a smaller apartment, but for a minor war. Keep, donate, trash, Ruth said from the armchair where she had been medically advised to rest and spiritually advised by no one to supervise. She had made 3 signs on index cards and placed them on the living room floor with the solemnity of a judge assigning sentences. Then, because she knew me, my mother added a 4th. Ask Nina, though she will make a face. I don't make a face, I said. You were born making a face, Ruth replied. The doctor held you up and you looked disappointed by the lighting. This was my mother, Ruth, 72 years old, recently bruised from a fall she insisted on calling an incident, widowed for 10 years and still capable of making me feel 12 with one raised eyebrow. She was moving from the house I had grown up in Haddonfield, New Jersey, to a smaller apartment 6 blocks away. Not assisted living, she had been very clear about that. I'm not going somewhere with activity calendars, Ruth said. If I want to paint a pot, I'll paint it in private, like a decent person. The fall had happened in the hallway near the stairs. Nothing theatrical. No broken hip. No ambulance siren. No grand moment where she saw my late father Martin beckoning from a heavenly doorway wearing the cardigan he refused to throw out. Just a wrong step, a sharp pain, and my mother on the floor, annoyed less by the injury than by the indignity of being found there by Mrs. Delgado from next door. She rang the doorbell and I couldn't get up, Ruth said, so I had to shout through the door. What did you shout? I asked. I said, I'm on the floor, but don't make a production of it. Which, if my mother ever had a family crest, would be carved underneath it. My father had died 10 years earlier, when Ruth was 62 and I was 35. Heart attack, sudden enough that people kept calling it merciful, which is one of those words the living offer each other when no one knows what else to do with the body of a sentence. Martin had been a good man. This is important. He was not the sort of good man who made speeches about goodness. He was the sort who knew which windows stuck in winter, who filled the car with gas before my mother noticed it was low, who sharpened pencils with a pocket knife, and believed a proper breakfast involved toast arranged like architecture. He loved my mother in particular verbs: fixed, carried, paid, waited. In our house, love did not often arrive wearing language. It arrived as a Titan faucet, a peeled orange, a coat held open without comment. After he died, Ruth continued living in the house as if grief were a guest she had agreed to host but refused to entertain. She got up, she made coffee, she paid bills, she trimmed the hedge herself until the neighbors complained, not because she did a bad job, but because she did it in March wearing my father's old work gloves and an expression that made them feel they had interrupted a private argument. For 10 years, my mother said she was fine. In our family, fine was less a word than a weather system. It meant, I am managing. It meant, don't ask. It meant, I may be bleeding internally, but dinner is at 6. I knew that because I used it too. I'm Nina, by the way, 45, divorced, mother of one adult daughter, Lena, who was 23 and living in Boston, where she had recently announced she might leave her marketing job and apply for a year-long design program overseas. It's not practical, I had told her on the phone weeks earlier. The words had left my mouth wearing my mother's shoes. Lena had gone quiet in that polite, modern way adult children go quiet, which is somehow worse than yelling. At least yelling gives you a shape to respond to. Silence just sits there and quietly becomes a country. I'm only saying you need a plan, I added. I know, Lena said. You always are. I had been thinking about that sentence for 2 weeks. You always are. There are sentences your children say that do not sound like accusations until you are washing a mug later and realize they have followed you into the kitchen. So now, I was in my mother's living room, helping Ruth sort 47 years of marriage, motherhood, widowhood, and mild hoarding into 4 categories on the floor. Why do you still have this? I asked, holding up a plastic bag full of twist ties. Because they're useful. For what? For tying things. What things? Ruth looked at me as though I had asked what spoons were for. The future is full of things, Nina. I put the twist ties in keep because one must choose one's battles, and because Ruth, with a cane, was still Ruth. By noon, we had sorted the kitchen. By 2, we had survived the linen cupboard, where my mother had kept enough guest towels to host a small religious retreat. By 3, I had reached the back bedroom closet. The back bedroom had once been mine, then a guest room, then a place where objects went when nobody wanted to make a decision about them, It smelled faintly of dust, lavender sachets, and old wallpaper glue, the official perfume of houses that have raised families and are now being asked to edit themselves. Outside, Haydenfield was doing what Haydenfield does best, looking composed. The street was lined with old trees and well-kept houses, every porch suggesting a family that owned matching mugs and knew where the Christmas decorations were. It was the kind of town where history sits politely on the curb and waves at property values. Inside the closet were coats, my father's fishing rod, a collapsed ironing board, 3 board games missing the pieces that made them games, and a stack of boxes labeled in my mother's handwriting. Christmas, photos, taxes 1998 to 2004, miscellaneous, odds, more odds. My mother had a gift for classification that stopped just before usefulness. I pulled down a shoebox from the top shelf. It was pale blue, the kind of box that once held sensible shoes. The lid was soft at the corners, the cardboard faded almost gray. There was no label, which, in my mother's system, meant either nothing or everything. I took it to the bed and lifted the lid. At first, just tissue paper. Then paper beneath that. Not tax records, not receipts, not old Christmas cards. A passport, a letter, a photograph, a folded application form. I sat on the edge of the bed. The passport was dark blue, the old kind, with my mother's maiden name printed in careful letters, Ruth Eleanor Hayes. But it was the photograph that made me stop. In it, my mother looked 21 or 22, younger than Lena. Her hair was dark and long, blown loose by wind. She was standing inside what looked like a train station, laughing with her whole face turned sideways towards a man I had never seen. Not smiling, laughing. There's a difference. Smiling is what people do when someone points a camera at them and says, "Quick, before the light changes." Laughing is the body forgetting itself. In that photograph, my mother had forgotten herself. The man beside her was tall and thin, one arm lifted as if he had just made a grand point no one had requested. He wore a corduroy jacket and the expression of someone who still believed life would make room if he asked it nicely. On the back of the photo, in my mother's young handwriting, it said, Julian Bell, Grand Central Station, 1975. Under the photograph was a letter, typed on letterhead, from an art school in Florence, the Accademia di Belle Arti. I read it once, then again. It said my mother had been accepted into their textile design program starting that autumn. There was also an application, half filled in, for a job in New York at a studio called Bell and Hart Textile Works. And then, last in the box, a handwritten letter, folded twice, still tucked in its envelope, never sealed. The paper had yellowed along the crease. In my mother's young hand, it began, Dear Julian, I know I said I would come. I stopped reading there. Not because I didn't want to know what came next, because I suddenly understood that knowing would be the kind of thing you cannot unknow, like seeing a crack in a wall and realizing the house has been speaking softly for years. "Nina," Ruth called from the living room. "If you're looking at your old school reports, throw them out. They won't have improved." I set the unsent letter back in the box. For a moment, I just sat there, surrounded by the ordinary debris of a life I thought I understood. Then I carried the box into the living room. My mother looked up from where she was sorting batteries into piles no one had authorized. "What's that?" "I found this in the back closet." Her face changed, not in any obvious way, not visibly enough for anyone else to notice. Ruth did not do visible collapse. If a meteor landed in the garden, she would first ask whether it had damaged the hydrangeas. But something small moved through her expression and shut a door. "Oh," Ruth said. Just that. I set the box on the coffee table. "You were accepted to art school in Florence?" She looked at the box, then at me. "For about 12 minutes, yes." "Mom." "What?" "You never told me." "There are many things I never told you. I also once ate an entire lemon meringue pie over a weekend and blamed your father." I picked up the passport. "You renewed this." "I had excellent intentions." "It was never stamped." "Passports aren't library cards, Nina. They don't get points for use." I took out the photograph. "Who is Julian Bell?" My mother leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling. "Someone who liked the sound of his own plans." "That's not an answer." "It's a very good answer. You just don't like it." I looked at the photograph again. The laughing woman in it seemed impossible. Not because Ruth had never laughed. She had. But she laughed at dry things, bureaucratic errors, badly written instructions, people who said journey when they meant problem. This laugh was open, unguarded, almost careless. I had never known my mother to be careless. "Were you in love with him?" I asked. Ruth made a small sound. "I was 22. At 22, you fall in love with people, weather, and songs that do not deserve it." "That's still not an answer." "It's the only honest one." I sat across from her. Outside, a moving van reversed down the street with a series of mechanical beeps, as if the whole neighborhood were being warned that history was backing up. "You were going to Florence," I said. "I considered Florence." "You were accepted." "Many people are accepted into things they don't enter." "And New York?" Ruth reached for a battery, inspected it, and set it aside. New York was complicated. "Was Julian in New York?" Julian was everywhere, according to Julian. Despite myself, I smiled. My mother did not. "Did Dad know?" I asked. Her eyes moved to mine then, sharp. "Your father was a good man." "I know." "No," Ruth said. "You know he was your father. That's not the same thing." The room quieted. There are moments when parents remove the costume of parenthood for half a second and you see the person underneath. Not fully, never fully, but enough to feel embarrassed by how long you mistook the costume for skin. Martin was kind to me, she said, in the years when kindness mattered more than poetry. And Julian was poetry? Ruth looked back at the photograph. Julian was poetry, yes, which is another way of saying he was often late and had no money. I laughed then. I couldn't help it. She smiled, but only barely. I lifted the unsent letter. Did you send this? If it's in the box, Nina, what do you think? Why not? She looked tired suddenly. Not old exactly. Tired in the place where memory lives. Because my mother got sick, Ruth said. Because your grandfather's hours were cut. Because Florence was expensive. Because New York was uncertain. Because your father was here, and he was steady. And I was tired of being promised weather. I held the letter carefully. And because I was afraid, she added. The words landed gently, which somehow made them heavier. My mother had said the thing. She had not embroidered it, softened it, or wrapped it in one of her useful little jokes. She had simply placed it between us. Because I was afraid. I thought of Lena in Boston, her voice on the phone weeks earlier. It's not practical, I had said. You always are, she had answered. The words rose in me with a heat that was almost shame. What were you afraid of? I asked. Ruth shrugged. Everything. Being poor, being foolish, being wrong, wanting something and looking ridiculous for wanting it, going and failing, staying and disappearing. Pick one, Nina. I had a range. That was the first moment I saw it clearly. Not the objects, not the passport or the photograph or the letter, the inheritance. Not the house, not the blue mixing bowl, not the wedding china we use only on holidays because apparently plates could become morally superior through lack of contact. Fear. A practical kind of female fear. Respectable fear. The kind that wears low heels and brings a cardigan. The kind that calls itself wisdom, because wisdom gets invited to dinner and fear does not. I think you gave that to me, I said, before I could stop myself. My mother looked at me. What? The fear. Her face hardened. I gave you a home. I know. I gave you stability. I know. I gave you... I know, I said, softer this time. You gave me everything you thought would keep me safe. She looked away. It was the wrong thing and the right thing to say. Families are full of those sentences. They sit in the room like chairs no one wants to use. I wanted to apologize. I wanted her to apologize. Instead, because we were us, I picked up a stack of batteries and asked, why are there 12 AAAs and no AAs? Because life is unfair, Ruth said. and for a moment, that was all either of us could manage. That evening, after I drove home, I called Lena. She didn't answer. This is one of the quieter punishments of having an adult child. They are allowed to have lives, and sometimes those lives do not pause for your emotional breakthroughs. I left a message. Hi, sweetheart. No emergency. Just call me when you can. Then I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the passport renewal website on my laptop. My own passport had expired 3 years earlier. I had meant to renew it. Meaning to do things is the attic where attention goes to die. I had not traveled anywhere meaningful since the divorce. There had been weekends, work trips, a wedding in the Hamptons where I wore shoes designed by someone with a grievance against women. But no real travel. No opening of the map. No standing in an airport with the reckless sensation that my life might briefly become unfamiliar. The divorce had been polite. That sounds like a blessing, and in some ways it was. There was no betrayal large enough to give the story shape, no courtroom battle, no wine thrown, just a long, slow dimming between two people who had once believed they were building a house and later realized they had built 2 adjacent waiting rooms. Lena had been 18 when it became official, old enough to understand, too young not to be changed by it. After she left for college, the house became quiet in a way I had thought I wanted, and then deeply resented. For years I had dreamed of time. Then I got some, and found it staring back at me with its shoes on. I told myself I was being sensible. I stayed at the same job because it was stable. I didn't move because moving was expensive. I didn't date much because people were exhausting and asked what kind of music I liked, as if the answer might help them operate machinery. I did not apply for the photography course in Santa Fe because it was 6 months and not realistic. I did not visit Boston when Lena invited me because flights were high that week and I had a dentist appointment. I did not say yes to many things. I called this maturity. But now, I wonder whether maturity had simply become the name I gave to fear once it had learned to use cutlery. Lena called back at 10. Hi, Mom. Her voice was cautious. Loving, but cautious. Hi, I said. Everything okay? She asked. Yes. I'm just sorry I was strange about the design program. A pause. You weren't strange, Lena said. You were you. There it was again. The kind of sentence that arrives wearing slippers and then punches you in the ribs. I know, I said. That's the problem. She was quiet. I don't want to teach you to be afraid of your own life, I said. The sentence surprised both of us. On the other end, I heard traffic, a door closing, Lena breathing. I know you're worried, she said. I am. And I know you think worrying is love. I closed my eyes. I come from a long line of women who confuse the two. Lena laughed softly. That helped. I found some things today, I said, at Grandma's. What kind of things? A life she almost lived. Another pause. A different one this time. Oh, Lena said. Yes. Is she okay? She's furious, so yes. Lena laughed again. I looked at the open passport page on my laptop. Take the chance if you want it, I said. We'll figure out the practical things after. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lena said, very quietly, "Thank you." It sounded like a door opening. Not loudly, just enough. The next morning, I returned to my mother's house with a coffee and cinnamon rolls from the bakery on Kings Highway. Because in our family, emotional progress required pastry as a stabilizer. Ruth was in the kitchen, standing on one foot to reach a mug. "Sit down," I said. "I am not an invalid." "No, you're a hazard with opinions. Sit." She sat, but only because she wanted the cinnamon roll. The blue shoebox was already on the table. I looked at it. "You took it out." "I didn't like it in the living room." "So you put it in the kitchen?" "The kitchen has better light." We drank coffee in silence. Then my mother opened the box and took out the photograph. For once, she did not make a joke. "He's still alive," Ruth said. I almost choked. "Julian?" "No, the Pope. Yes, Julian." "You know that?" "I'm 72, Nina, not medieval." "When did you look him up?" She tore the edge off her cinnamon roll. "I didn't look him up. I came across an article." "Online?" "Yes." "So you looked him up?" "I investigated the survival of an acquaintance." "Mom." "He lives in Connecticut," Ruth said. "Or did, 2 years ago. Retired, widower, still giving interviews as if textile design were a form of international diplomacy." She said it with annoyance and tenderness. The tenderness was smaller, but it was there. "Did you ever write to him?" I asked. She shook her head. "Why not?" "Because what would I say? 'Hello, Julian, remember the girl who didn't come? She married a kind man, had a daughter, bought a washing machine that lasted 21 years, and now has arthritis in her left thumb. How are your knees?' That's not nothing." "No," Ruth said, "it's not nothing. That's why I didn't do it." She picked up the unsent letter. "I used to think not sending this meant I had made my choice properly. And now? Now, I think I was trying to make the choice stop hurting." She looked at me then. "I did love your father." "I know." "No courtroom," Ruth said. "What?" "Don't make a courtroom out of a heart. You'll never get honest testimony." I sat very still. There are things mothers say that feel borrowed from somewhere beyond them, from their mothers, or their grief, or the long underground river of women who learn to speak in fragments because whole truths were too expensive. "I don't need you to regret Dad," I said. "I don't. And I don't need Julian to be the great love. He wasn't." I waited. She touched the photograph. "Julian was one of the lives." "One of?" My mother smiled faintly. We are alive more than once, Nina, if we're lucky. The mistake is thinking the life we choose is the only life we mourn. I looked at her across the kitchen table. This woman who had packed away art school in New York and a man named Julian Bell, then built a life with Martin, raised me, buried him, learned to live alone, and still kept a passport unstamped in a shoebox at the back of a closet. For the first time, I did not know whether the box was proof of regret. Maybe it was proof of remembrance. Maybe there is a difference. What do you want to do with it? I asked. The box? Yes. She placed the photograph back inside. Keep. I nodded. She added the passport, the Florence letter, the New York application. Then she picked up the unsent letter and held it a moment longer. Do you want me to mail it? I asked. My mother looked horrified. After 50 years? Absolutely not. I'm a sentimental, not deranged. I smiled. But I might write another, Ruth said. I looked at her. To Julian? To myself, she said. And then, because this much sincerity had apparently reached unsafe levels, she pushed the pastry bag toward me. Eat the other half. You look underfed by emotion. We finished packing the house over the next 2 weeks. The blue shoebox went into the keep pile. So did my father's coat, despite 3 separate conversations about closet space. Martin would want someone to use it, I said. I use it. For what? For remembering what pockets are for. There was no arguing with that. On the last day, after the movers had taken the furniture and the rooms began to echo, my mother walked slowly through the house with her cane. The walls looked startled without pictures. The hallway where she had fallen seemed smaller now, less like a threat, more like a sentence that had already been read. In my old room, she stood by the window. I thought I'd be sadder, Ruth said. Are you? Yes. We looked at each other and laughed. That was Ruth, too. Honest, but only if trapped by direct evidence. Your father hated moving, she said. I remember. He once labeled a box things and thought he had helped. That sounds like Dad. She smiled. Martin made ordinary life feel less ordinary. That's not poetry, but it's no small thing. No, I said, it isn't. The new apartment was bright, smaller, and slightly too warm. My mother complained about the kitchen drawers, the view, the thermostat, and the neighbor's dog, which she had not yet met but had already judged by sound. Still, when I placed the blue shoebox on the top shelf of her bedroom closet, she did not tell me to put it elsewhere. She watched me, then she said, "Not too far back." So I moved it forward a little. That night, at home, I renewed my own passport. It took less than 20 minutes, which annoyed me. Some acts should be more ceremonious. Trumpets, perhaps, or at least a candle. Instead, there was a form, a photo upload, a payment screen, and me at my kitchen table in my socks, choosing possibility with bad posture. While I was finishing, a text came in from Lena. It said, "I think I'm applying to the program." I typed back, "Good." Then, after a moment, I sent another, "I'm proud of you." Then, because I'm still myself, one more, "Please check the visa requirements." 3 dots appeared, then her reply, "There she is." I laughed. I wrote back, "I'm learning." The following Sunday, I visited my mother in the new apartment. On the kitchen table lay a sheet of writing paper, new, white, unfolded. I did not ask to read it. Ruth did not offer. Instead, she poured tea. We sat in the bright little kitchen, mother and daughter, surrounded by fewer things than before. After a while, she said, "I wrote to her." "To who?" "Myself, the girl in the photograph." I looked at her. "What did you say?" My mother stirred her tea, though she had not added sugar. "I told her she wasn't foolish." Her voice was steady, almost. "I told her she did not ruin everything by staying, and I told her I was sorry I made her disappear." I reached across the table and took her hand. She looked down at our hands as though physical tenderness were an unexpected bill. Then, to my surprise, she did not pull away. "I think I've been afraid too," I said. "I know," Ruth replied. Of course she knew. Mothers often know the thing and still fail to hand you the right tool. "I don't want Lena to carry it," I said. "Then don't give it to her." I laughed softly, as if it's that easy. "It isn't," Ruth said. "But most things are not easy and still need doing. Look at fitted sheets." We sat there for a long time. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked twice. My mother frowned. "Tiny dog, big emotional life." I laughed, and this time she did too. Not the laugh from the photograph, not that young, open, wind-blown laugh beside Julian Bell in Grand Central Station in 1975. This one was older, smaller, threaded with loss and the ache of rooms emptied after too many years. But it was hers, and it was here. When I left, the blue shoebox was no longer in the closet. It was on the bookshelf, between a dictionary and a gardening book my mother had never opened. "You moved it," I said. "It's a box, Nina, not a scandal." "No," I said, but it was not hidden anymore. On the way home, my phone buzzed at a red light. A text from Lena. It said, "Application submitted." Then another, "Terrified." Then, "But happy terrified." I smiled. The light changed. My mother's passport had never taken her anywhere. For years it had sat in a box, unstamped and patient, carrying the shape of a door she had not opened. But maybe some doors do not disappear just because one woman cannot walk through them. Maybe they wait, not for the same hand, not for the same life. Ruth had carried the unlived life. I had found the pattern. Lena, perhaps, would not have to inherit it. Not all of it, anyway. For the first time in years, I wanted the document that said I could. Not arrival, not transformation. Just the next woman in the line, hearing the old fear rise in her throat and choosing not to pass it on. Nina asked me to tell this story not to settle anything between her mother, but to understand her a little more, the woman beneath the parenting. Nina, thank you for trusting me with this, and I want to start somewhere specific. Take me back to that closet, that shoebox. What do you remember feeling in those first few seconds?
Honestly, tired. That's the real answer. We'd been at it all morning, sorting things into piles: keep, donate, toss, ask Nina. My mother has a category for everything, including indecision. I was just grabbing whatever was left on the closet shelf so we could be done with that wall. I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted the closet finished. Then I pick up this shoebox, and it's heavier than a shoebox should be. And I open it expecting buttons or old letters from cousins or something. And there's a passport. And the photo it stopped me. She's laughing in it, really laughing, mouth open, not the little closed mouth thing she does now. I stood there, holding it, still in the middle of all these piles, and I remember thinking, that's not her. That's somebody else. Which doesn't make sense. It was her, but that's what I thought.
You stopped reading right after just one line of that letter to Julian. What made you close it?
I don't actually know if it was about respecting her privacy. I'd like to say that. It sounds better. I think I was scared. The line was, "Dear Julian, I know I said I would come," and something about it, I just shut the lid. Like closing a window in winter. You don't think about it, your hand just does it. I told myself it was because it wasn't mine to read. That's probably half true.
And when did you first notice you had picked up fine from your mother?
My divorce. No question. Everyone kept asking how I was, and I'd say fine before they even got the whole sentence out. Fine, fine, I'm fine. And some of that was true. Some days I was fine. A lot of days I wasn't sleeping, and I'd cried in the Stop and Shop parking lot, and I told my sister I was fine 20 minutes later. I don't know when I learned that. I don't think there was a day. It's not like I caught her doing it once and copied it. It's more like you're raised in a house and the house has a temperature, and you don't notice the temperature. You just are it.
Has Ruth's voice come out of your mouth before? With Lena?
Oh, constantly. Constantly. I'd say things like, be careful. Have a plan. Don't spend the money yet. Think it through. And look, none of that's wrong. I'm not going to sit here and act like being careful is some character flaw. I'm from New Jersey. We check traffic before we leave the house. We bring snacks even for a 20-minute drive. We know which roads flood by heart. So it's not the words. It's Lena's telling me something she's excited about, and I go straight to what could go wrong. Money, visas, her job, the timing. I don't even ask her why she wants it. I heard myself doing it on the phone, and I actually had to stop talking mid-sentence. I don't love that I do that.
What was it like finally asking your mother about Julian?
Hard. She doesn't make it easy. If she doesn't want to talk about something, she'll just change the subject, or make a joke, or ask if you've eaten. You end up apologizing for asking. I wasn't trying to accuse her of anything. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't going in there with some confrontation. She made 2 jokes before she answered me for real. And then she said she'd been afraid. Just like that, no big speech. I believed her. I don't know why that surprised me, but it did.
Proof of regret or proof of remembrance?
I go back and forth on this, honestly. The passport was never used. The letter was never sent. So some part of me still wants to call that regret, because that's what it looks like on paper. But I don't know. Maybe it's both. Maybe it doesn't have to be one or the other. I think she kept it because it was true, and she didn't have anywhere else to put it. I'm not going to pretend I have that fully worked out.
If you had the possibility to write something to the Nina on that call with Lena, what would you say?
Slow down. That's it, really. Just slow down before you answer her. I don't think past me was trying to be cruel. She was scared. She thought that's what a mother does. I'd tell her Lena wasn't asking for permission. She was asking to be believed. I don't know if I'd be able to say it that cleanly in the moment, though. That's the kind of thing that sounds good after.
You renewed your passport that night. Was it an errand or something more?
It was supposed to be just an errand. Mine had been expired 3 years. 3 years, and it never once bothered me. That probably says more than anything else I've told you. I didn't book a trip. I'm not going anywhere right now, as far as I know. I just didn't want it to keep sitting there expired. That felt like agreeing to something I didn't actually agree to.
Can you fully let go of what you and your mother carried? Or is it day by day?
Day by day. Definitely not fully. I don't think you get to fully. I still ask too many questions. I still want Lena to have thought of everything before she does it. Sometimes that's fine. Sometimes that's just me being scared and calling it advice. I'm trying to tell the difference. I'm not great at it yet.
And how are things with your mother now?
Pretty much the same, if I'm honest. She still says she's fine when she isn't. She still complains about the neighbor's dog like it's a personal vendetta. But the box is out on the bookshelf now, not in the closet. That's the only real difference. It's just sitting there now. She doesn't talk about Julian much. Every once in a while she'll mention Grand Central or the studio she almost worked at, like it's nothing. I don't push it. I don't know if anything's really changed between us. Maybe it's just that we both know the box is out there now, and neither of us has to pretend it isn't.
Nina's story isn't really about Florence or Julian or a life her mother never lived. It's about what gets handed down without a label. Fear dressed up as caution. Caution dressed up as love. Ruth didn't give Nina a box of regrets. She gave her a box of choices, finally placed in better light. Sometimes, the kindest thing we can do for the people who raised us is stop asking them to have been only one thing. If you saw your mother or yourself somewhere in Nina and Ruth's kitchen, I'd love to hear about it. Write to me at sayonemorethingpod@gmail.com. And if this one stayed with you, pass it to someone who's still sorting through their own family's boxes. I'm Andrea Applewick, and this is If I Could Say One More Thing.